Hi, everyone. Good day. I am so glad that you're here. My name is Heather Reed. I use she, her pronouns, and for those who are using accessibility technology, I am a 60-year-old white female sitting in my home office with wall-to-wall bookshelves behind me. I've got ash-colored hair, red glasses, and I'm wearing a navy blue blouse. I've been teaching about event contracts for over a decade now, and this topic of contract cancellations is one of my favorite to teach. I'm sure that some of you listening are aware of an event organizer canceling their event that they're working on, or perhaps they've heard of another planner that is working on an event that has had to be canceled. And dismantling an event, I can't even imagine how much work that must be. Fortunately, when I was actively planning with association and not-for-profit clients, I didn't have to work through the logistics of canceling an event. However, as a contract review consultant for a wide number of event organizers, I have watched from the sidelines a few events be canceled. On the flip side, though, I hope most listening don't have their story or their own story or anyone else's story about an event supplier canceling an event contract. However, I do know that this happens. This happens for reasons like closing down for renovations, being double booked, picking up a better piece of business. So there are a variety of reasons why one might want to cancel an event contract. So what exactly is the purpose of a cancellation clause in an event contract? Well, it is there to create the ability for either entity, and I'm using entity rather than party, so either entity to the contract, so the event organizer or the event supplier, and it's there to create the ability to withdraw from the contract. The cancellation clause does not refer to force majeure. Force majeure is a separate clause and subject matter that needs to be included in an event contract, but it's not the same as cancellation. So this cancellation also does not refer to underperformance due to a force majeure incident. So this is purely cancellation, and I want to make sure that we understand the difference. So the reasons, the cancellation clause should provide either entity the right to cancel the contract for reasons that have been specifically identified in the contract or for their own reasons not specifically included or identified in the contract. And the decision to cancel the contract only needs to be held by one party. So the cancellation clause is used in the contract to not only identify contractual reasons for being able to cancel the contract, but also it needs to be used for, one, outlining the provisions of notice of cancellation from one entity to the other, and two, it needs to identify provisions for financial damages that would be payable by the canceling entity to the other entity. Today, we're not going to explore financial damages, but we are going to look at all of the perspectives that should be included in a cancellation clause. So knowing that there are typically two entities involved in an event contract, and knowing that there are contractual reasons and non-contractual reasons for contract cancellation, I got thinking, how can I teach event professionals to ensure that all of the scenarios of cancellation are addressed in an event contract? Well, it was this problem that I was thinking about years and years ago. And I know it's going to sound completely and totally cliche, but I really honestly did have a moment in the shower. I had a moment of clarity. I was mulling over in my head how to simplify all the different angles of cancellations and event contracts when it hit me. Let's just go old school with an XY chart. A simple XY chart everyone can remember. So let me explain this. So I want you to, if you have a writing utensil handy and a scrap piece of paper, simply follow along with me. We're going to use a simple X axis and a Y axis. Simply draw a vertical line and a horizontal line that intersects with that. So I put the event or the event organizer on the top end of the vertical line, and I put the event supplier, and you'll see on the screen that I've used the example of a venue as an event supplier. You put it on the bottom end of the vertical line. Then on the left side of the horizontal line, I put reason. And on the right end of the horizontal line, I put no reason. And then because I need to be reminded of different things that are included and not included, I put force majeure in the middle with a strikeout over it so that I remind myself that force majeure is completely separate from cancellation. Force majeure leads to termination, not cancellation. So I use the term quadrants to identify each of the 4 sections. So I went from top left, being quadrant 1, moving clockwise through to quadrant 2, and then moving down to quadrant 3, and then quadrant 4 being in the bottom left corner. So it's a pretty simple way to classify or group the scenarios of cancellation. Now, I also want you to think about the top 2 quadrants because they represent the negotiating the contract from the perspective of the event organizer. So quadrant 1 and quadrant 2, the upper half of this chart, has considerations where the event organizer has both contractual reasons and non-contractual reasons why they may need to cancel the contract. And then the bottom portion of the quadrants 3 and quadrants 4, they represent negotiating the cancellation clause in the event contract from the perspective of the event supplier. So the event supplier will also have contractual reasons for canceling and non-contractual reasons why they may need or want to cancel the contract. So then, to further clarify things, I want you to consider the left side of the chart, and that is quadrants 1 and 4, which is negotiating the cancellation clause from both the perspective of the event organizer and the event supplier for having contractual reasons for canceling the contract. So that left side is about having contractual reasons for either entity. And then the right side is the opposite. That's quadrant 2 and quadrant 3, where the event organizer or the event supplier have no contractual reason for canceling the contract. Now, I hope that that's simple, but what I want to do is to walk through each individual quadrant because that's where you're really going to learn the different scenarios or the different perspectives that we need to remember when we are negotiating the cancellation clause. So here we go with quadrant 1. What do event organizers need to know about quadrant 1 in order to ensure that we are negotiating complete and balanced contract clauses? So again, I'm using event supplier as the venue in our discussions today, but this could most certainly apply to other event suppliers such as a catering contract, a speaker contract, an AV provider, show services, for example. So there's all scenarios we need to consider in cancellation in all of our event contracts. So quadrant 1 represents the event organizer wanting to cancel the event contract for contractual reasons. And here's where I think it'll become really clear what we're talking about. Examples of contractual reasons that an event organizer might have to cancel a contract could be: the venue's quality rating has significantly declined since contract signing. The venue's brand flag has changed since the signing of the contract. The venue's management or ownership has changed since signing of the event contract. The venue is publicly known to be in financial difficulty after contract signing. The venue has breached the negotiated terms of the event contract, thus impacting the event organizer's ability to hold their event in some manner. So if you think about a venue not being able to provide the contracted meeting space, or not being able to provide the contracted sleeping room block. Also, the venue could be conducting construction or renovations that were not disclosed to the event organizer. So it's important here to note that the possible scenarios in quadrant 1 are rarely included in the event supplier's draft contract. It is the responsibility of the event organizer to negotiate the contract to request these protections and put them into the event contract. So then we're looking at quadrant 2. Quadrant 2 represents the event organizer still wanting to cancel the event contract for non-contractual reasons. So in other words, the event organizer wants to cancel the contract for their own internal reasons. And these reasons could range from: the event organizer may make the decision not to hold the event for their own internal economic reasons, or for optics reasons. They want to cancel the event itself. The timing of the contracted event itself may not continue to work for the event organizer, and the venue contract needs to be canceled. It could also be that the event organizer may have negotiated too small of a venue and needs to move their event to another venue in order to accommodate everyone. The event organizer may have changed the mandate or the structure of their event, and perhaps the meeting space configuration, or the services offered by the venue, or the amenities included at the venue are no longer meeting the needs of the event organizer. And finally, the event organizer may simply want to host their event in a different venue or use a different supplier. So those that are actively planning and those that are selling event contracts, you will agree, most likely, that 99.9% of event contracts include this quadrant, whereby the event organizer wants to cancel the contract for their own reasons, and they don't have a contractual reason for wanting to cancel the contract. So always, I shouldn't say always, almost always, this perspective is included in a draft contract. Then we hop down to quadrant 3. And now we're switching to the event supplier's perspective. And in this case, I labeled it as a venue as an example. So here the venue wants to cancel the event contract for non-contractual reasons. So in other words, the event supplier wants to cancel the event for their own internal reasons. So again, using the venue as an example, but you can also think exactly about a caterer, a speaker, an AV provider, show services, event suppliers may have their own reasons for wanting to cancel an event contract. So thinking about a venue, the venue may want to be able to take a better piece of business, which could represent any or all of higher sleeping room rates, more meeting space occupied, better use of their services. The venue may want to undergo construction or major renovation and have the ability to cancel the contract. The venue may have changed ownership, and the new ownership does not want to honor existing contracts. So similar to quadrant 1, it is important to note that the possible scenarios in this quadrant 3, they are rarely included in an event supplier's draft contract. Again, it is the responsibility of the event organizer to negotiate the contract to request these protections against these kinds of scenarios into the event contract. And I know that I have personally experienced responses to my requesting cancellation language and cancellation by venue or cancellation by supplier specifically, were given answers like, we have never canceled a contract, or we cannot cancel a contract. Well, my response is typically perhaps the venue hasn't to date canceled a contract, but that doesn't mean that it is not possible. And then finally, we get into quadrant 4. Quadrant 4 represents, again, the event supplier's perspective, and they want to cancel the event contract for contractual reasons. So in other words, the event supplier wants to cancel the event contract for reasons that have been outlined in the event contract and that are the fault of the event organizer. So these reasons could range from the event organizer has defaulted on making deposit payments by the contracted dates. The event organizer has defaulted on meeting contracted deadlines, such as submitting final agendas for the event or providing menu selections. The event organizer has misrepresented the nature of the event. So the event is being marketed as a public concert when it was booked as a private party. For example, the event organizer is publicly known to be in financial difficulty after contract signing. The event organizer has failed to purchase or arrange or secure the necessary permits or licenses that were contractually identified as being necessary. The event organizer has created an event that poses a physical danger, such as exceeding capacity limits or employing dangerous substances. And then the final example would be the event organizer has violated in some manner the terms and conditions of the event supplier. So as the event suppliers draft contracts, are typically drafted by legal counsel to protect the interests of the event supplier. Some, not all necessarily, but many of these scenarios could be covered in a draft contract. Therefore, it is the event organizer's responsibility to ensure that the repercussions of failing to meet the contractual requirements that have been set out in the negotiated contract, in cases whereby cancellation could be prompted, the event organizer needs to make sure that they are reasonable and disclosed and made aware of the possibilities of their contract being canceled. So, as I said, the typical draft contract from an event supplier only addresses the possible scenarios in quadrants 2 and 4. Quadrant 2, if the event organizer wishes to cancel the contract for a reason not addressed in the contract. And then quadrant 4, if the event organizer breaches the terms of the negotiated contract. In a balanced contract, which is where we hope to end up, is a contract that protects the interests of both entities named in the contract. In that case, we would want all 4 quadrants to be addressed in contract language. So while the focus of today's 25 and a half minutes together was to identify the perspectives, please know that the cancellation clause also needs to have language included that addresses how financial damages are calculated and how notice of cancellation is to be given to the non-canceling entity. So I promise that the financial damages aspect is an entire discussion all of its own, and it will most certainly be a topic for an Event Contracts Exposed episode in the future. So this is the bottom line for today's episode, is that there are 4 essential perspectives. Not only does the event organizer need to understand how to negotiate the language that's already included in a contract, remember that's quadrants 2 and 4 typically, the event organizer must also be able to articulate and confidently negotiate missing language, which is quadrants 1 and 3, into the draft contract. So each of these 4 event contract cancellation quadrants, they actually represent real, legitimate scenarios that could impact an event's logistics, an event's budget, an event's reputation, or all of the above. The options that an event organizer will have when cancellations arise, well, those will only be as strong as the enforcement tools that have been negotiated into the event contract. So no tools, really no leverage. Ultimately, the extent of options you have as the event organizer, should any of the situations be encountered, depends on what you have proactively negotiated into an event contract. So in closing, if or when you are ready to learn more about the critical subject of cancellation clauses in event contracts, please consider our Certified Event Contract Professional program. So Joan has a question, and I think we've got a couple of minutes left. Do impossibility clauses play into cancellation or force majeure clauses? Joan, okay. And if there are multiple parties involved in the meeting, how does one incorporate one party's cancellation into the whole? All right, Joan, you and I. So impossibility is an objective scenario. It is impossible or it is illegal to host an event in a venue, or for the event organizer to host an event. Force majeure clauses are typically the acts of God clauses or scenarios. So that's my layperson understanding. I am not legal counsel. Please consult legal counsel always, 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 even for cancellation clauses. But cancellation, in my understanding, is separate and needs to be separate language in a contract. If the cancellation is due to a force majeure, my understanding is it's called termination. And that's how I've been teaching to know that there's a distinction between what is a cancellation for certain scenarios and what is a termination because of the scenario of being impossible or illegal or frustrated or force majeure. So, and then Joan says, don't hate me. I never could. I have more love for her than ever. If there are multiple parties involved in the meeting, how does one incorporate one party's cancellation into the other? So by multiple parties, Joan, I'm assuming multiple parties signing the same contract, or is it, I know, for example, one example I often use is that if you are signing a contract for a convention center, that you are linking it to a hotel contract, for example, but that's not the same. Those two contracts would not be linked in the case of cancellation, in my understanding. They can be linked in the case of force majeure, unless I suppose it's the venue or the event supplier canceling the contract, but that would be a very, very finessed situation. So, Joan, if you've still got questions, let me know, and I hope I did it justice. If there are no other questions, I thank you for tuning in today. AV or offsite venue for a meeting held in a hotel, for example, or offsite venue for a meeting held in a hotel. Boy, I'm not sure I'm getting that one, Joan. An AV supplier contract or an offsite venue contract for a meeting held in a hotel. So if you're canceling the event, are you able to cancel the AV contract, or are you able to cancel the offsite venue? I would say for reasons of your own, the AV or the offsite venue would expect damages to be paid. If it is due to force majeure, then that's a different scenario. But if it's cancellation by the event organizer, and I'm actually not exactly sure whether when it's cancellation by an event supplier, what the scenario would be. But definitely that's one. I'm going to do some homework, Joan, and talk to you, because that would have to be, that would be an interesting scenario. And if the venue, for example, cancels the complete event and you have auxiliary contracts, how does the venues, presumably then perhaps it would be the venue's responsibility to pay the damages of those other contracts, but you would have to build in that language that you have auxiliary contracts, and if the venue, the main place of the event, cancels the contract, then they would be responsible for damages incurred by the event organizer because of their actions. So as Joan said, to be discussed. There's so much to learn. I hope you understood my simple concept, my XY chart. I hope you understood the scenarios that you need to consider building into your event contract. And we will talk about cancellation damages another day. I am signing off for now, folks. Thanks, and see you on the next one.